And people will say, well, but if dinosaurs walked the earth with man, then shouldn't there be historical accounts of eyewitness accounts of dinosaurs? And guess what? There are. It's one of the best kept secrets of the evolutionists. And it's censored from all history books. But look it up yourself. Do you know who wrote about seeing dinosaurs? People like Pliny the Elder 2,000 years ago.
Professor, an amusing thing. I mean, when Duco mentioned Pliny the Elder talking about dinosaurs, how he had seen dinosaurs, of course, he gave no reference. I had no idea what he was talking about. So I Google, Pliny the Elder dinosaur, and I start looking for some kind of reference that he might have been talking about. And then I realized, as I'm reading through this article that was describing the context of Pliny the Elder in relation to dinosaurs, I recognized the writing style. And suddenly I realized, I know who wrote this. And I scroll back up to the top of the page, and sure enough, it's Phil Center. So, once again, would you walk through what? Because I have your article but of course it'd be better to hear it in your voice.
Yes. The deal with Pliny the Elder is in his book Natural History. He describes several different species of snake, and in the ancient Roman language, Latin, Draco meant serpent, and he was one of the first to restrict the term to just a specific kind of serpent. And he describes the Draco as a non-venomous serpent that's found in Africa and Asia, and kills its prey by wrapping around it and squeezing. And if you think about it, I mean, you're a reptile guy, you know what that is. So he also mentioned that it's several cubits long, which it's got to be a python that he's talking about. Now he goes further and mentions that the Draco kills elephants in this way. And of course, no python's big enough to do that, but you can recognize that as an exaggeration of a python. In every other respect, the description matches a python.
It's hard to get through any of these early documents without some kind of exaggeration.
Yes, travelers' tales and such are the sources of some of the descriptions anyway, and those do tend to be embellished from time to time. But we can definitely see an exaggeration of a python in Pliny's Draco. And the fact that it is a snake and not a dinosaur is supported by the fact that every time we see a Roman myth that mentions a creature called a Draco, and that myth is, the illustration is always of a snake, which tells us that Draco simply meant snake. Except they did tend to reserve the term for snakes in mythological contexts or formal contexts. So it was kind of like saying serpent rather than snake, the formal way rather than the way.
So okay. Pliny was talking about, if I understand you correctly, Pliny was talking about pythons that existed both in Africa and in India. So was he just talking about the general clade of pythons? You're sure of that?
Apparently. And if you think about it, the African rock python and the Indian python have very similar markings. They have a very similar look, similar sizes, and the ancients may simply not have two different species. We see that a lot in the text when zoology was just getting started. Things that today we split into different species were considered to be, well, they were, I hesitate to say lumped, but they weren't recognized species back then.
Okay. So what other person did Dutko say was talking about having seen dinosaurs?
Herodotus, the Greek historian.
Herodotus was speaking specifically of a place near Buto in Egypt, which just so happened to be a center of cobra worship. And he had heard of the flying snakes or winged snakes of the area. And he said they had the appearance of the hydros, but with membranous wings without feathers like those of a bat. Now, the hydros is a Greek and European water snake. And the young Earth creationist contingent keeps saying that Herodotus's winged snakes are pterosaurs. Don't look anything like a snake. They look much more like a bird than a snake. So something that looks like a snake that's near a center of cobra worship and has membranous extensions with no feathers, that suggests a cobra to me. And so what I see here is Herodotus describing a cobra as if it's got little bitty wings, and he wouldn't be the first to do that. For example, in Vietnamese, the term for the spread hood of the cobra is a pair of wings. It's a different term in different languages. We call the hood a hood. The Swedes call it a shield, and the Dutch call it a pair of cheek flaps. And different cultures call it different things. Some consider it a single structure, like a shield or a hood. Others consider it a pair. So, for example, in Dutch, it's called a pair of cheek flaps, and in Vietnamese, it's called a pair of wings. And so it would not be surprising at all if the ancient Greeks considered this a pair of things as well, and again, a pair of wings, especially given the wording that Herodotus uses. Now, I'm not completely married to the interpretation that his winged snakes are cobras, but it does seem plausible.
Okay, well, what I got out of this when I looked up, Herodotus and dinosaur, trying to find whatever reference, because Duto didn't give a citation. What I found was that when Herodotus had gone to Egypt, that they showed him a pile of bones and spines that they were fossils, and nobody knew what fossils were back then. And he, rightly understood that these were once the bones of animals that had been alive. And he talked about how the climate may have changed because indications of the types of life that lived here before. So arguably, Herodotus was one of our first paleontologists in a sense. But I would have to say that seeing fossils of dinosaurs is very different than claiming to have seen dinosaurs.
Yes, it is.
Do you know that Marco Polo, one of his most famous writings was from 1294 AD. It was called Of the Province Named Karazhan. Chapter 40 is censored from all writings of Marco Polo in history books. You know why? Chapter 40 is where he described in detail the Tyrannosaurus rex that he saw and where they would hang out.
Almost everything Dutko says there is wrong. First of all, the year in which the book was written, no. Marco Polo was still in jail at that point. He was in prison and wasn't writing anything. And secondly, history books don't censor any chapters of Polo's book because no history book mentions them chapter by chapter. They usually give just a little summary. And thirdly, there's no T-Rex either, nor did he see one. He describes something that people had described to him that he himself never saw. That was apparently found in India, so the stories went. And the description that was given to him was that of a gigantic serpent several paces long that left a mark in the sand like a heavy beam was being dragged. And it had limbs near its head. And so there is actually something in India like that. It's called a crocodile. Now, crocodiles do leave a trail in the sand because they drag their tails behind them, which dinosaurs did not do. So this is clearly not a dinosaur. There are hundreds and hundreds of dinosaur track sites all over the world, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a tail drag anywhere in them. As for the pair of limbs near the head, nowhere in the description does it say those are the only limbs. It just says the limbs near the head end in 3 claws. And that's exactly the case in a crocodile. It's got 5 fingers, but only the first 3 end in claws.
Only the first 3 end in claws.
Right. The 4th and 5th fingers are very, very short and possibly on the way to becoming vestigialized, and they've lost the claw.
Okay. All right. So just to prove that these chapters are not censored, I will include links to them below. I have a different take And it depends on the translation you read, because I found a couple of translations like the one you were talking about, and then I found another one that I think describes something else. The province of Karazhan and its great serpents. When a man leaves Yasi or Chasi and goes 10 days westward, he finds the province of Karazhan, with a capital of the same name. The people are all idolaters and subject to the great Khan. The king is a son of that monarch named Kogatin. Gold dust is found in the river and on the mountains in large pieces, so abundantly that a bar is given for 6 of silver. The porcelain, too, formerly described, circulates for money, but is procured from India. Here are snakes and serpents so huge as to strike all men with astonishment. They are 10 paces long, 10 palms broad, and have no feet, but only a hoof like that of a lion. The nose is like a loaf of bread, the mouth so huge it would swallow at once a man whole. The teeth are immense, nor is there any wild beast whom they do not strike with terror. There are smaller ones, 8 paces long and 6 palms broad. The mode of catching them is this. They remain during the day in great caverns under the earth to avoid the heat, but at night go out to feed and seize all the animals whom they can reach. They also seek drink at the rivers, fountains, and lakes, and then make a deep track in the sand as if a barrel had been dragged through it. In it the people fix a stake, fasten it to a steel instrument sharpened like a razor, and cover it over with sand. When the serpent comes through the track and strikes against the steel, he is pierced with such violence that his body is divided from one side to the other, as high as the umbilical cord, and he presently dies. They then take the body and extract the gallbladder, which they sell very dear, being an excellent medicine for the bite of a mad dog when administered in small doses. It is also valuable in childbirth, and when given to the woman, safe delivery immediately follows. The flesh also is sold at a high price, being considered delicate food. The serpent also enters the dens of lions, bears, and other fierce animals, and devours their whelps when he can get at them. While I agree that some of your description fits or could fit that of a crocodile, there's others in here. There's other things in here that do not. The head in the shape of a loaf of bread, for example, being living underground in dens and going inside of the dens of other carnivorous mammals to eat their whelps. That is consistent with another animal. And while I could not tell where the province of Karazhan is, nor the city by that name either, I have read estimates that it may have been Yunnan, and that matters here because the animal described in this text lives throughout the southern half of this map, and whatever it is obviously not a Tyrannosaurus. Try to imagine a tyrannosaur living in burrows underground, or going into the burrows of carnivorous animals to hunt for their whelps. Imagine a T-Rex being hunted by people the way Marco Polo describes here. That's not even possible. You can't fix, and you would have to have crawl over it in order to be cut like this. Walking as a T-Rex does, that method would not work. Now imagine a Tyrannosaur with no feet. Although, to be fair, I did see another translation that said that it only had front feet, or rather that it had short front legs with no feet but ending in 3 claws. That doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't match any known animal, but the translation I just read does. So if we assume that the province of Karazhan is modern Yunnan in the tropical region of India, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, then I think I know what this animal is. Let's look at this again. Here are snakes and serpents so huge as to strike all men with astonishment. They are 10 paces long, 10 palms broad, and have no feet, but only a hoof like that of a lion. Now let's look at that bit by bit. How long is a pace? Remembering that the average height in the 13th century was 5'7", let's go with the low estimate that a pace is 0.75 meters. That means that an animal 10 paces long would be 7.5 meters, or 24 feet, about the size of a reticulated python. Reticulated pythons live throughout the tropical areas of Southeast Asia, and they can get huge. The world record is reportedly 10 meters or 32 feet, so we're definitely within range. Now, how long is a palm? Roughly 3 inches. So a breadth of 10 palms would be 30 inches. And that's a bit fat, even for a female reticulated python, unless she's just eaten someone. But it's not that much of an exaggeration, and is still a lot closer to a python than to a tyrannosaur, especially since Marco Polo said it had no feet. Now, what about the hooves of a lion? Lions don't have hooves, but they do have claws, and so do pythons. Right next to the cloaca, you'll see 2 claws, the last vestiges of their hind legs. These claws are even connected to leg bones on the inside. On some of these ancient snakes, there is even a remnant of a pelvic girdle, lost to evolution eons ago. Now let's read the rest of that description. The nose is like a loaf of bread. That tracks. That certainly doesn't fit a T-Rex, but definitely fits a python. The mouth so huge that it would swallow at once a man whole. That's true too. Reticulated pythons have been known to swallow full-grown people whole. The teeth are immense. Again, that's correct. Retics have 6 rows of massive recurved teeth, about 100 of them in all. You do not want to get bit by one of these things. Nor is there any wild beast that they do not strike with terror. That's true too. As babies, they're vulnerable. But this one is mine. He's not even a year and a half old. He started out about the size of a shoestring, but he's been growing at a rate of up to an inch a week. And they grow all their lives and they live for decades. So there will come a time when I can no longer lift him. As adults, retics are apex predators, top of the food chain. No natural enemies, only competitors battling for king of the hill. Remember Ka from the Jungle Book? That ginormous snake that was so big that it could even threaten a black panther? That's what we're talking about. And the rest of this description, the kind of tracks that the thing leaves, the way they hunt for whelps in their dens, all of that fits the reticulated python.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree too. The description you just read in that particular translation, that's got to be a python, especially when it mentions the hooves like a lion and yet no feet. That's how else would you describe the spurs of a very large python using analogies from the zoology of the time?
I think it's pretty obvious that whatever Marco Polo was talking about was probably one of these, but it certainly wasn't a T-Rex, nor any other kind of dinosaur either.
I mean, it is insane what you have been lied to about.
I know, right? We're only a third of the way into your hour-long speech, and I've already done 9 episodes just correcting the lies you've told so far.
Okay, so the evidence is overwhelming that when the skeptic tries to laugh at you of some of these things, you need to know, take a squeegee to everything you've been conditioned to believe and start fresh again.
Yes, follow that advice and you'll start to see reality and stop believing in creationism.
First, start with the authority of God's word.
No, arguments from authority are worthless, logically fallacious, and you don't have God's word anyway. Don't forget that the Jewish Torah, the Christian Gospels, the Quran of Islam, the Kitab-i-Aqdas of Baha'u'llah, the Avestas of Zarathustra, the Adi Granth of the Sikhs, the Mahabharata's Bhagavad Gita, the Vedic scriptures, the Book of Mormon, and the Urantia book were all declared by some of their believers to be, the absolute truth and the revealed word of the one true God, even though they can't agree on who the God is. And they say that all the others are deceived. The only logical probability is that they are all deceived, at least to some degree. Every word of all the scriptures ever penned by men were written by men, mere fallible men, not gods.
And then secondly, start examining the evidence and you'll be like I cannot believe I never heard any of this stuff before.
Remember also that evidence is a body of objectively verifiable facts, things we can both prove to be true, that are also positively indicative of and or exclusively concordant with one available position or hypothesis over any other. You don't have any of that for creationism. Evolution, however, has literally tons of it from many different fields of study. Now, I know that you really wish that there were dinosaurs and such still around, and so do I. I would love to be able to go back in time to go camping in the Permian or fishing in the Carboniferous or bird watching in the Eocene, or at least be able to send a drone back so I can safely experience the beauty of the different phases of the worlds that came before us. Billions of brilliant sunsets without any sign of man, no plastic trash, no pollution, just magnificent beasts in a pristine environment. But we can't do that. And no amount of wishing will ever make anything come true. The best we can do is quit pretending, quit imagining things that were never real, and follow the clues to show us little glimpses of what once was.